There's some good apps that you can have, but also you can just go online, just with Google, and just Google Matthew chapter 7. I'm beginning a series. It's one of those very pastoral things, right? Doing a series. I am doing a series on, and everyone goes, oh, I'm bored to death already. Building good foundations. I don't have my plumb line here, but I will show that to you next week. Too many things were happening. My plumb line, anybody that knows a plumb line, does anyone know what a plumb line is? You have a string and a heavy weight at the bottom. And no matter where you turn it, upside down or backwards, it will always give you, if it's not moving, once it goes straight, it's going to be straight. Every wall, if you go by that plumb line, will be straight. I'd like you to turn with me to the book of Amos. Amos chapter 7. I know I said Matthew chapter 7, but let's go to another chapter 7. Since that was read from Matthew chapter 7, we're going to first head to Amos chapter 7. And I want you to move down to verse 5. This is in Amos, it's Old Testament, a little further than the middle of your Bible. Amos, A-M-O-S, chapter 7. This is a prophet, and this prophet actually was a fig farmer. Special kind of a fig, one that you have to prick. There are figs in the Middle East. There's a few kinds of figs that they grow, but if you don't prick a hole in the side of it, it will not become ripe. It will just stay hard. And Amos was that kind of a farmer from the town. I'm not remembering his town, but it was near the temple in that area. So I cried out, Sovereign Lord, I beg you, stop. How can Jacob survive? He is so small. He's referring to Jacob or Israel. That's the other name for Israel. Original name of Jacob, Yaakov, became Israel. And he's referring to the people, the children of Israel. So the Lord relented. This will not happen either, the sovereign Lord said. This is what he showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall that had been built true to what? Plumb. It's like plumb. That's the plumb line. He showed me the wall that was built straight. And in his hand, he had the plumb line. The Lord asked me, what do you see, Amos? He says, a plumb line. The Lord said, look, I am setting a plumb line among my people of Israel. I will spare them no longer. We as Christians who profess to be by the name of Jesus oftentimes live under rules that are different than what Jesus gives. And the difficulty with that is, how can you say you believe in something or are with someone if you're not going to do as he asked? And in fact, do you remember the scripture that Elijah read? Those who, in fact, let's go. Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Therefore, it says, anyone who hears these words, so akuo in Greek is to hear, right? Or in Hebrew, the shamai, right? Shema, to hear. Anyone who hears these words of mine and what? Puts them into practice. Or one who does them is like a what? Sophia. Sophia, it's in Greek is Sophia. Sophia is wisdom. A wise person who builds their house upon the what? The rock. Winds come, problems hit. The house may have problems, it may lose the roof, but it's going to stay hard and fast. It's not going to flow into the ocean. But then comes the more. Okay, you ever heard the word more? Yes, it sounds like a country in Lord of the Rings, doesn't it? Moria. But actually, more, we use it in English. More on. Ever heard of that word? It means to degrade. Or, in the Greek, English translation of the Greek is the fool. The more. And so, the next one is in verse 26. But anyone who hears, again, Shema, the ears, who hears these words of mine and does not, what? Do them or put them into practice, is like a moron. You got it. You got it. I heard it up here. The more. The more. For the house, when the rains come, remember that rain come down and the floods go up. Remember that? As a kid, you might have heard this. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up. And the house on the rock stood firm. But the house in the sand went splat. I remember that as a kid. Splat. I've got a little keynote there. Let's put up here our first. There's a video I would like you to take a look at. And I've got this, by the way, look at this cool looking thing there. That is a lighthouse and a half. Look at that guy standing there. You see that? So now, I'd like you to see something that we're going to move forward on. And it seems like still, even though we have it in a different spot, there it goes. Take a look here. This was a couple years ago. The house is on the sand. Now, I know there's rocks there, but look at this. A lot of it is sand underneath the rocks. Look at this. Watch this. You see that? Look at that. This is up in Northern California. We can see it. There's other places that you can see this. How building on top of sand can be really hard. And I know there's rock, but oftentimes footers are put down. But look at this. Whole parts of that. So look at that coming down on the apartment complex. You see that drop that just happened? You see here, no matter how many footers you put down, at some point, when the water comes, what's going to happen? There's going to be a very large insurance problem. Right? We all experience this in our lives. Building Better Foundations is a 5-part series, and we're going to do a Hebrew version of it, Albert. We're going to do a Hebrew version of it. We're going to read from chapter 7, and we're going to go backwards through the text for 5 weeks. Backwards. And everything's going to be based on doing versus hearing and doing versus not hearing and not doing. Because just because you sit there and listen to Jesus, and just because you read his words doesn't mean you're wise. In fact, you're going to find out today that even if you're someone like me that says, Lord, Lord, did I not say things in your name? And did I not tell people about your word? And Jesus says, I never knew you. Because you didn't do what I asked. You only talked about it. We in the West love to talk. I know. Pastor John talks a lot, especially when he's preaching, right? But the question is whether or not it translates to something real. First step, let's move backwards in our text. You ready? We're going to go in Hebrew. Remember, in English, here, I'm going to put my back to the camera. In English, we write this way, right? Right? Well, in Hebrew, you come over here and you write that way. And then you come back and then you write that way. You write to the left, from the right to the left, versus left to the right. Now, I am dyslexic, which means it's easy for me. I love Hebrew. Sometimes English, I start reading it backwards. What's my problem? As a kid, I never understood until I found out maybe in my 40s that I have some dyslexia. I never knew that. I just figured I'm weird, which I am. And I was sitting behind the projectors as a kid always, where Dad was doing Theater of the Universe, and I could read all those slides perfectly. My friends are like, I can't read that. I said, how can you not read it? It's right there. Now, when it's in English, front, I had a problem. In the back, same speed. No problem. I'm good. Everything's like that. So when I got to Greek and Hebrew, it was easy for me because, you know, the same amount of hardship that I had in English was simple. I was just like everyone else. I was on the same plane. I could do it easily. I got this one, man. But the thing is, when you're going in Hebrew backwards, it helps you understand where you're coming from and a context. Move to the beginning of chapter 7 in Matthew. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. First step to doing the words rather than just merely hearing the words. Saying, Lord, Lord, doesn't mean anything. Doing is different. It says in verse 1, do not what? Judge. Or you too will be what? Judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be what? Judged. Hypocrisy, you know what that is? It's when you tell other people they're doing something wrong, and then you're doing the same thing. Right? That's a human problem. It's not just Republicans or Democrats. It's all of us. That's a human problem. Judgment is a very interesting thing, and think about it. Actually, the word to accuse someone is the word katagarizo. Katagarizo. What does that sound like in English? Categorize. When you meet somebody, you know, let me step this back, because oftentimes when we read this text, we many times think that this text has to do with going to heaven. You don't want to judge people, and you say, oh, don't judge them that they're not going to go to heaven or something like that. Let's step it back. Let's get out of the religious thinking, the post-Jesus religious thinking. Let's instead get into the mindset of people that were sitting listening to Jesus. Do you know that most of us, when we meet someone else, the first thing we do is start categorizing them? You know that, right? You say, first of all, what does this person look like? What are they doing? And this is, we don't tell anyone, of course. It's in the back of our heads. Is this person good or bad? We do that, don't we? Usually, maybe if someone meets you and they have a lot of tattoos and a lot of different items on their body, well, some of you might gravitate towards that. Others might gravitate away from that. It's a very divisive thing to some people. You've already judged them. We already have judged them many times, haven't we? Because we categorize people immediately. Does that make sense? In fact, we categorize them as good or bad, safe or unsafe for us. Oftentimes in conversations, or not even in conversations. Sometimes we judge people without that person even saying a word. We separate them by color of skin, by socioeconomic, what kind of watch they wear, what kind of car they drive. Have you ever met anybody that gets more angry at a nicer car in road rage than a ugly car? Or maybe you might see a Police Lives Matter at the back and all of a sudden you're upset. Or the other guy says, oh, that's a good person. They're one of us. We all have our tribes, don't we? My tribe looks like this. Your tribe looks like that. This is how human beings are. And And Jesus says, when we judge, we lose our ability to listen to anything that person says or know anything that they are. Because at that point, it blockades us from the thing called empathy. You know what empathy is? It's not to necessarily care for another person. That's more sympathy. Empathy is to understand another person, to walk in their shoes. You know, if you're at war with another nation, you have to have empathy for that other nation. You know that, right? The only way to find their weak point is to empathize and walk in their shoes, to understand their situation. So it doesn't mean when you say empathy, it doesn't mean you love the person. It means you have to understand them. But when we judge, what happens is we blockade ourselves. We stop our ability to even know any possible good thing they can help for us. It blockades us from an ability to actually live with others in harmony. Are you with me? It stops us. It really just blockades us. And Jesus is plainly telling us that if you're going to be in the kingdom of heaven, meaning the kingdom of heaven is here, not just in the future, but now, we must learn to not see people as check boxes. Are you with me? People are not objects to be checked off. They're not a part of a tribe that's your tribe or their tribe. They're people. I'll tell you, I experience this all the time. I'm a pastor. Do you know the minute that someone asks me what I do, and oftentimes in non-religious circles, it's in construction, dealing with the fellowship hall, right, or anything. The first thing I'm telling you, the minute I say pastor, I am full-on judged. I can always tell. The conversation changes. And the assumption is I don't know what I'm talking about, obviously, because you're a pastor. And on top of that, you're white. That's another one, right? And that is like, whoa, you can feel it, but you know how you get in? Is if you are judged, you know how you find your way out of it? Not by getting angry. Instead, you learn more about them. Are you with me? So if I start asking questions, it breaks down the barrier that they have against me. Did you know that? Because it forces them to open up and say, oh, well, this person's interested. Oh, well, they're interested. Oh, well, maybe they're interesting too. All of a sudden, your flat personality they thought you had now has become a sphere. Judge not, or else you'll be judged. For the portion that you judge others, you shall be judged. Let's turn it around. If you do not judge others and categorize them, you might get judged less. Are you with me? The first step that I see in this text from the foolish, the more versus to be wise, is to listen to Jesus and do like Jesus did. He went to the sinner's house, and the Pharisees said to him, he eats with sinners. And Jesus says it was not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. What he really meant is maybe you guys need a doctor too. Because if you have cancer and yet you don't want to go to the doctor, you'll live a very short life. Does that make sense? Whether you're on the right or on the left, we're all the same. The same ground in which the person is buried here will be buried there. The common ground makes us one. The question is what we did with the time we had. And Jesus says to them, why do you look at the speck in your brother's or your sister's eye and pay no attention to the log? I like the plank here, but log is even better. It's like a 2x4, right? I've got a 2x4 hanging out of my face. I say, hey, you, hey, you got a speck in your eye. And the person goes, I can't see your face. There's a big 2x4 hanging out of your head. Did you see the humor that Jesus has here? The reality is that you can be a lefty or a righty, and you can be somebody that is judging another with a plank flying out of your face. The question is whether or not you're going to be open and allow the plank to be removed. Jesus said that. First remove the plank, and then you'll be able to see the other speck. My friends, the first step to happiness is to stop categorizing everyone you see. I know it's human nature. I know that's something we've learned since this big. As a child, we're walking along, and all of a sudden, someone's walking along, and your mom, gives you the hand, oh, no, over here. Or maybe your dad does, or whatever. I know those are things that we have learned from this world, but we must, now I'm going to sound like Yoda, we must unlearn what we have learned, right? And it's possible. I know the psychologists tell us that it's impossible to change human nature. I'm telling you, Jesus changes people. You are worth the time that he gives. The question is whether or not you will allow yourself to change. So, judging. And by the way, let's move on down to verse 7. I know you haven't looked at your text. You've been looking at me. I know I talk too much. But let's go to the next step, verse 7. The next step of understanding how to get rid of our judgmental, our categorizo mindset, our categorizing mindset is next step. We go, if you ask, verse 7, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Are you hearing the text? Look at that. It's amazing. Knock, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. He who seeks, he or she who seeks will find. And the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if you had a son and he asked for some bread, will give him a stone? That's terrible, isn't it? In other words, God says, I want you to change and I want you to be happy. You are used to judging other people. God says, stop with the judgment, and if you need help, ask me. I'll help you. I promise you that. Knock, 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 knock. There was a parable. I don't want to go into too many stories here, but getting close to time here, but there was a parable that's one of my favorite parables in the entire Bible. It's a parable of an older lady, a widow, who needed justice. And she had a king in her town that didn't care about God and didn't care about people. But she kept knocking on his door every day for justice. And one day, he says, I don't love God and I don't care about people, but because this woman's driving me crazy, I'm going to give her what she wants. That's how construction works. You're supposed to be awake. Are you awake? That's how it works in life. Keep asking. Don't push. Keep asking. When I say don't push, push in the need. Don't push to shove your agenda. Instead, push what you need. Knock, and the door will be opened. Seek, and ye shall find. Continue to pray to him. For narrow, verse 13, for entering the narrow gate is hard. It's not easy to do this. You must walk. Remember, Ryan last week had this sermon. Narrow is the way that leads to life. Wide is the way that leads to destruction. Why is that? Because when you walk wide, you can fall anywhere. But narrow is a pathway. When you're going through a mountain, if you walk wide, you might die. You might fall over a cliff. But when you go narrow and you follow the path, it's like driving. Imagine if you wanted to drive a car anywhere. I have this phone on me, my GPS. I am so glad there are not self-driving cars. My GPS a few days ago was putting me, I'm driving on the highway, and it had me in the community in Pasadena, driving right through people's houses. I'm like, something needs an update. I just updated it. What's that all about? I'm glad, because if the self-driving car, it would have me driving through everybody's house out there. But anyway, the thing is, I know, Google and Facebook and all these guys are going to censor me now. They say, no, we got to have self-driving cars. But the deal is, when you drive on the road, there's a narrow path. Sometimes we have 3 lanes, but there's a narrow path on each lane. You die if you don't stay on the path. Quick and easy is the way to drive just off the road. Oh, it's easy. Woo! But what happens to you? There is a way that seems to man that is good, but the end thereof is death. The wide way is the way to death. Narrow is the way to life. Jesus is saying the same thing. My friends, he's giving us practical advice for our church, for our people, for our community. We work together. You know, if you want to build a good house, have a foundation good. And Jesus said it well. He says, you know, when a builder starts, you know what they do? They count the cost. Now, I know sometimes you can be over budget when you count the cost. But at least you had a contingency plan, because you looked beforehand. And a lot of times, we just like to go running into a thing. I'm just going to go by the seat of my pants and, whoa, what? You have to think it through. You build the foundation. You build the building. You make sense out of it, one step at a time. In the Christian walk, it's no different. This is why before baptism, I always go through some kind of a class, and I'm very serious about what it means. Because no life changes without change. And no change happens without foundation. Because that's the one thing that's going to hold you. When all the world goes crazy, you've got to be able to hold on to that one thing, Jesus. That thing that holds you fast. It's the anchor. Looking at my time, I only have a few more minutes left. So, he promises also that there are true and false prophets here. He says, watch out for the false prophets. For they come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are furious wolves. Sometimes even in our Christian community we have that. Have you ever had that? Dear brothers, Jesus loves you so much. But then when it really comes down to it, as long as you give a lot of money, he loves you so much. But if not, right? Maybe even in politics. It's always judged that way. Money. Or something you can do for them. It's always for them, not for you. It seems like it is for you, but it's really a way to get a vote, right? The difficulty is that people come looking like they care, and yet they don't. Jesus talked about this in John. He says, I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand doesn't care about the sheep. When the wolf comes, you know what he does? He throws down his stick and runs. And literally he says, because they're hired hands, they don't care. They care about this, not about them. Then he says, I am the good shepherd. I die for my sheep. And Cosette mentioned last week that the shepherd even lays as the door to the sheep pen. Because the shepherd, the good shepherd, sees the wolf and stops the wolf, scares the wolf, whatever it is, the hyena. The sheep cannot run out when the shepherd is there as the door. My friends, Jesus is the one that lives this. Am I boring you? I hope I'm not boring you. All right, let's keep going. I could tap dance later. But you'll probably beg me to stop. All right, so we continue on. So true and false prophets. Not everyone says to me, verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who... Wow, here we are again, talking versus doing. How many of you have grown up in churches with lots of talk? Lots and lots of talk, and when it really comes down to it, no one does nothing. Have you ever had that? Kind of reminds me of Southern California. We love to talk. We're in Hollywood area, right? We pave the pavement in Hollywood with broken pieces of glass and put it in the asphalt so that at night it sparkles. It looks great. And the talking sounds great. But then crickets. When there's actual action that needs to happen that matters, unfortunately, we all have this problem, don't we? We all have that log sticking out of our eyes. But Jesus said that if you listen to the words that he has and you practice them, you're going to be like something I'm about to show you. Let's go ahead and put that video back up there again. We have the ending of that last one. I'd like to see it up here on the screen. All right. Now I'm going to hit the next one. Take a look at this. This is over in France, in Brittany, France. An amazing lighthouse, isn't it? It's out there and you say, boy, the water is so calm. Well, let's take a look at this. This is an amazing thing. Take a look at this. There's some great footage. Look at that. That lighthouse has been there since about 1600. I mean, it enlarged and enlarged. It's out there where the ships can easily get hit by the rocks. Look at this. It's hard to see it in here, but when you're online, you really can see it. So if you want to go online later and take a look at that. Wow, and there are people that are inside that lighthouse. In fact, you'll see in a second that there's a guy that actually, look at that shot. Look at that guy. Imagine the swell, the oxygen moving around him as he's going. And in fact, this is footage taken from Still's camera, so they're going to run it fast so you can see how it looks when the shots were being taken. Look at this. Boom, boom, boom. I don't know. It's sometime along here. There it is. Look at that. Did you notice he goes back inside when the water comes? I'd go back inside as well, wouldn't I? My friends, look at this. This is a great one. This guy that's in a chopper, and all of a sudden you see a big swell come. This happened about 2 years ago, and a guy was lucky enough to be there at the time. Bang. Look at that thing. Look at that. There's a moment you don't even see that lighthouse. I want you to know that you can have strength in your life like that lighthouse, my friends. This world will hit you from all sides. This world will take you down, try to hurt you, and you will go down if you do not have your foundation embedded deep into a rock that holds fast. He or she who listens to my words and does them is like Sophia, the wise one, who when the storms come and the gale winds blow and the waters rise, the house on the rock stands firm. This series we will continue through as we discover the other things you can do, specific things you can do in your life that will make you happier. You'll notice this. Streams of life, I always talk about joy. I'll say something like, may the joy that flows from the cross of Calvary. It sounds very flowery, right? The joy that flows from the cross of Calvary. And you say, but Pastor, that's blood. Jesus died on the cross. Yes, because you can have joy that comes from that death into your life. Yes, it's a sad event, but that sad event bought your redemption and makes you new. Joy can flow from it. And it will give you life, hope, peace, and actually it'll give you a life. You know that get a life? From Jesus. My friends, next week we're going to discover how sometimes we can build a shallow grave. Let's have a shot of the next poster for next week, Ruli. It's, if you take a look here, next week, part 2. Oh, whoa, before he is exalted. There we go. Digging a shallow grave. My friends, I want you to dig life, not a grave that's shallow. My friends, you are not shallow. Jesus died for you, and you will have wisdom. God bless you all.